Hey, welcome back to the Personality Hacker Podcast. My name is Joel Mark Witt.
And I'm Antonia Dodge.
This week on the show, we're talking about careers, our relationship with our career or our job or what we do in life to make money or to create value. I think the first time I was introduced to the idea of a career was when my grandfather, my father's father, retired from his career when I was probably about 4 or 5. I remember it being kind of a big deal. I have vague memories of this. But I remember him getting a lot of congratulations from the people he had worked with, and he had been at this job. He had fought in World War II, and when he had come home from the war, the company that he was employed in before the war told all the young men that if you go fight in the war, you will have a job when you come back. It was at like a power company in the local area, and he was, I think, in the accounting department. He came back from World War II, 1945, and got a job right away, like was promised. And he worked there from 1945 into the early 1980s. So this was like 35, 40 years, like a big long span. I'm doing the math in my head, but it's like almost 40 years, I think. He was at this job, this career, doing the same thing day in and day out his entire working life. And I remember he was also in the military. I think he was in the Army Reserves, and every summer he would take his 2 weeks of vacation and he would go and he would serve in the reserves, the Army Reserves in the state of Pennsylvania, and that would be his vacation time. And that's what he did year in and year out for almost 40 years. He retires, he gets some gifts from the place he was employed, people that he worked with congratulate him, and the family says, well done, you've retired, now it's time to enjoy your retirement years. And that was pretty much the extent of what I understood a career to be as a young man. It was this thing that you got and you had your entire working life. And in your 60s, you retired and went on with enjoying your quote-unquote golden years. Well, fast forward to, my working life and the kind of jobs and things I've done since I graduated college, and it's a much different experience for me. It wasn't a one institution or a place I went to work that I had a job for a long time. I've done a lot of different things up until now. And I thought what we could do today is talk a little bit about how our relationship with our career shapes us and the changing dynamics of career. I think there were a lot of things in place in the past that this notion of a career, quote unquote, was really working at one, maybe two companies your whole working life, and then you retired. And now people, I think the average person stays in a job, I want to say average 2 years or something, I think I heard. So it's a much different world that we live in. It's much more transient. We have a lot more options available to us, but we also have a lot more challenges because we have a global economy. We have interconnected businesses on a global scale. A lot of jobs are being outsourced out of Western countries into other countries, and there's a lot of confusion. There's a lot of upheaval, and people don't have the stability or underpinning anymore. And then we've got things like eBay or Etsy or Uber popping up where people can create money, make money, basically being an independent contractor for the first time ever. The internet has enabled us to buy and sell goods and services all over the world from the comfort of our own home, or drive people like Uber in our own car, whatever that looks like for you and wherever you're at. So I think this is a really interesting topic today, and I thought what we could do, Antonia, is talk a little bit about our experiences in the work environment and draw some conclusions, maybe some helpful ideas for people who are struggling with this idea, because you take into account all that stuff, all the actual making money thing. And then we also talk a lot about here at Personality Hacker, do what you love, follow your passions. And people say, well, how do I connect this idea of making money in this fragmented work environment with my passion that may not be something that I can understand how to monetize? So this is really an interesting topic today, and I'd like to get into it a little bit more. So let's start by talking a little bit about, I think you and I both have interesting work environment stories, like how we came up in our working lives. Maybe just briefly talk about our stories so people kind of know where we're coming from. And then I think we can give some tips and ideas and have some discussion around this.
Yeah, I think that's a good idea, especially since, as you mentioned, we don't have the same environment that people have traditionally had. And in fact, the people who may give us advice are used to a very different climate, career and job climate than, even our generation had more of a sort of traditional way of looking at careers and jobs than, say, millennials do. And the opportunities are completely different because of the ability to broadcast yourself and market yourself online. The platforms like YouTube that are just set up. Like you mentioned Etsy and you mentioned Uber and you mentioned eBay. And then I think about YouTube, which gives people exposure that they may never have had before.
Or Elance or whatever these companies are, like Odesk, I think.
Yeah, exactly.
Upwork. It's called Upwork now.
Well, you're talking about jobs. I'm talking about exposure to create a platform for something else in the back end, like to do something that is not a traditional job, to do something that is very artistic. You just need to be able to get enough followers and then attract attention, and then you can then direct their attention to something that is providing value for reciprocity of value, or like getting paid to do something through either advertising or through selling a product like we do. So there's a lot of different ways to go about careers at this point. So many more options than we've ever had before. And that means that the traditional way of going about it is going to be quite limiting. And so I think one of the reasons why our stories are interesting is because we've never been raised, or you were talking about it. We were never raised to see careers in the same way that other people were.
Yeah.
Despite your story of going to your grandfather's retirement party and having that model in front of you at a very young age, I don't think you got the message that was the ideal or what you were supposed to be doing. And that's a good thing. I never got that message either. That's a good thing because we've entered a domain where there's not that level of loyalty anymore. This idea of come back from the war and you're going to have your job and then you're going to be loyal to us as a company, and as a company we'll be loyal to you. That level of loyalty left, I would say, probably in the 90s when major tech companies started coming up, and then there was layoffs, and the world has too many changes to make those kinds of promises. Like there's just too many things that are unknowns as we enter, extended consumer technology territory. And so it's not that corporations are necessarily evil, and that's not why they're loyal anymore. I think it's more that there's just we're breaking new ground here. And so there's no ability to make promises when you're entering new space and territory. So I think do you want me to start out with my story, or do you want to start out with yours?
You can start out with yours. I did a lot of talking at the beginning.
Okay. All right. Well, I actually was raised in an extremely religious environment that encouraged me to not go to college. College was considered, it was considered like man's learning, and it was considered something that you would do it was considered a waste of time, basically, a waste of time and money. So I was encouraged not to go to college unless I was going to go for a trade. And I wanted to dedicate all of my time to volunteer work, basically to being in a ministry of sorts. And the ministry that I wanted to go into paid nothing. It paid zero. So it was 100% volunteer. And I started doing that right out of high school. I volunteered about 1,000 hours a year in this ministry work that I was very passionate about. So my goal was to support that. And 1,000 hours a year roughly translated to about 22.5 hours a week. So it was essentially a part-time job. And then I had to get another job to subsidize it, another part-time job to subsidize it. And that didn't include all of the other things that came along with the ministry work that had nothing to do with, the specific tasks at hand. There was a lot of helping people out, and a lot of going to various sorts of meetings, and a lot of outreach programs that I was a part of. So it was really a full-time job. And then I had to figure out how to subsidize this full-time job with a part-time job. So my focus entirely was on make the most amount of money in the least amount of time. That was my 100% focus. So it didn't really matter what I was doing. I didn't care what my job was. I didn't care what my career was. I only cared that I got as much money as I possibly could per hour of labor worked. And at the time, in the early mid-90s, it seemed like one of the best careers, quote unquote, to get into for that was radiology. So I started going to college not to get a degree specifically, like a college degree, but to get a trade degree specifically in radiology.
Because your career at that point was going to be a means to an end.
That's exactly it. It wasn't really even a career. If somebody had asked me what my career was, I would have not said that. I would not have said, "Oh, I want to be a radiologist."
This is just a way to make money, though.
Yeah, I would have said I want to be a minister. That's what I would have said. And so this was going to be my way of becoming a full-time minister that paid nothing at the time. So I started school. I went to, all the prerequisite courses, started out in community college because it was cheaper, did a bunch of, anatomy, physiology courses and lab courses, and, started down that path until I ran out of money. And I couldn't balance going to school, simultaneously already being in the ministry work that I was in, volunteering basically what was, 30 plus hours a week. And then also having a part-time job on top of that, which was not very much, because when you work part-time, you don't really get very much per hour unless you're doing something like radiology. And I was living on my own. I was like 17 years old when I moved out of my parents' house because I was just like too eager to get my life going. And so the one thing that ended up getting dropped was the thing that I had been told was not important at all, which was college. So I couldn't afford it, and I wasn't going to go into debt for it, and it was only a means to an end anyway, and I figured I'd just find creative alternatives. So I stopped going to college. I dropped out. And I never even blinked. Like, I never even thought about it because the ministry work was my full-time job, and that was the important thing. So from that point on until I met my first husband, I just did a bunch of random part-time jobs, and I discovered temp work. I discovered going to, basically being a contract employee. And I probably did that the majority of my 20s. I just did contract work. And that meant that I did a lot of menial, mind-numbing tasks, especially as an ENTP. It was a lot of filing, and it was a lot of making copies, and it was a lot of stapling stuff, and it was a lot of, running things around, and it was a lot of just like really menial office work, data entry. Most of it was kind of horrifying for me. I mean, not horrifying, but it was not very interesting.
Yeah. Well, and I can, from your personality, it sounds horrifying to me, and I'm a very similar personality. I would have that, that part of me that would hate the filing and the data entry type stuff. And during this experience, there's no point in time where you're like, oh, I could do something as a career or a job that I love that juices me up, that gets me excited. Because
Never.
The ministry was that part for you.
Yeah.
And so it was never a thought in your mind of like, oh, I could do XYZ career, like in psychology, or be a therapist, or go into, teaching or something, because that really gets me excited. That was not something you ever thought about.
Never. It was never an option. It was always going to be being a minister all the way.
Yeah.
And so I learned a lot, by the way, in that volunteer work. I mean, I have become just about fearless in the face of any sort of dissenting opinion, any sort of, I've been in many different styles of apartments, houses, etc. Because a lot of the ministry work happened, knocking on people's doors and going into outreach and dealing with people. I remember I had somebody who I worked with who was a heroin addict, all the way up to, knocking on $1 million doors in Portland, Oregon. And up in the West Hills, made famous by the Everclear song. And it was like just the stratification of people that I met. And it was just, I learned a lot. I learned how to be persuasive. I learned how to public speak. I learned a lot through that process. But the challenge was that anything that I could have done on a secular level was always considered just a means to an end. So I was never primed to think in terms of work for a company and eventually retire and get your gold watch. I never thought in those terms. And so when I realized that I was graduating from the religion of my youth and moving on to whatever was happening next, the number one thing that hit me, not the number one, excuse me, there was a lot of things that hit you. When you lose your religion, quote unquote, so to speak, there's a lot of stuff that hit you.
Sure.
But one of the things that hit me was I get to have a career now. Like, I get to do that. And there was a time periods there where I stopped volunteer work as much. And, I had some full-time jobs. It wasn't like I had only had part-time jobs. I had some full-time jobs. And by the time that I was graduating and transcending the religion of my youth, I was doing temp work in Anchorage, Alaska. I was living in Alaska at the time. And Anchorage is just like all of the wages go up when you're in Anchorage. Everything is more expensive. So I was doing part-time not part-time, but full-time contract gigs that were paying like approximately $17 an hour. So at the time I was separating from my husband. I was leaving the religion of my youth. I had, I got my own apartment for a while, and then I had all this discretionary income because I wasn't doing the volunteer work. I didn't have any kids. I didn't have a husband now, and I had a dog, but that was pretty much it. And so I got to spend my money. I mean, it was like the first time that I could think in terms of career, like what am I going to do with the rest of my life? And also I had all this discretionary income that I wasn't used to having because I was always used to applying that money towards ministry work. So I started going to a bunch of seminars and events, and really focused hard on self-education. Now, I had always been a self-educator. I've always read anything I can get my hands on about any number of different, traditionally intuitive thinker topics. And so there was never been a time when I haven't had a book in my hand. So I've always been a self-educator, but I really focused hard on self-education at the time, and I started going to these events. And some of them were on leadership, and some of them were on internet marketing. Some of them were just on systems thinking, and some of them were on different maps and models of human development. A lot of the ones that we teach were things that I got introduced to at some of these, at these events. And so for the first time, I could really, like, as I mentioned before, I could ask myself what it was that I wanted to be doing, and I didn't have anything telling me that I didn't have anything removing permission. I could give myself as much permission as I wanted to do literally anything. And because I hadn't had this template in my head that everything was supposed to look a certain way, I felt that the world was my oyster. And so I started really getting into this concept of internet marketing. I started hanging out with other internet marketers. I moved from Alaska to Las Vegas to be in like an internet marketing incubator. So I lived with a group of, it was just a bunch of dudes. It was like a group of guys and me, and we all lived in this house and in Vegas, and with a bunch of rooms and like a really nice furnished apartment or house in Vegas. And we did everything we could to try to get our internet businesses up and running. And I made a lot of mistakes during that time period. I got connected with, projects that I absolutely should have said no to, lots of them over and over and over again, to a point where I got hammered home that, for me, the highest leverage thing is what I say no to, not what I'm saying yes to.
Yeah.
And that was very well illustrated. And it took about 4 years to go from I could do this to actually starting to see some return on investment. And that was actually largely due to you, because I had a previous partner. You bought him out. You and I started partnering in Personality Hacker, and you and I then became Personality Hacker. And from that point on, I mean, the first thing you said was, we got to start a podcast. And I'm like, okay, let's start a podcast. Let's see what happens there. And from there, it's just been a matter of like figuring things out and then actually succeeding in quite a bit, as opposed to just like one failure after another, which was what I was used to in the previous 4 years. Just like not one terrible decision after another, but like, I'll just say that we were starving artists. I'll just say that there was a lot of times when there was sleeping on couches and living by the grace of other people's generosity. And I think there was a time period there of like, we ended up having a baby, and that was really, there was a lot of strain around that. So it was trying to run an internet marketing business with like a new, an infant. So there was a lot of struggle, but I think in retrospect, when we talk about careers and jobs, in retrospect, I realized that I just never thought it wasn't going to work out. Like I didn't believe I had to follow a template. I was never told that it's supposed to look a certain way. I was always told to be counterculture of how everybody else sees jobs and careers. There's been a lot of times when people ask me what my college credentials are, and I just tell them I don't have any. Like you have a master's degree, and I've got Jack, right? I've got a couple, I've got some semesters at a community college. And so there were moments when I thought, oh man, I'm just never going to be able to do this because people aren't going to be okay with my lack of credentials. And then I thought, well, screw that. Like, I've never cared about that kind of thing before anyway. So I'm just going to keep going and see what happens. And so my whole quote unquote career of not having a career has led me to a place where my relationship with the concept of jobs and careers has always been counterculture. So I just keep going. Like I keep going until circumstances force me to stop, and nothing has forced me to stop yet. And I think when I see people struggling in the job market, I almost feel like I don't have very good advice for them, because my advice is to do something outrageous. My advice is to not feel like you have to fit into whatever the templatized mold is. Like I find careers and the business industry to be just as broken as, say, public school systems are. I find it to be a lot of round holes and a bunch of square pegs trying to shoehorn themselves into it. I find the hiring practice of most companies to be abysmal.
Yeah.
Most companies hire based on the stupidest criteria. Really, truly, phenomenally stupid. I've seen so many really terrible people get hired on because they were great during the hiring process. And you can game the hiring process very easily. In fact, this is what basically the definition of a C player is somebody who's really good at getting hired and then they work just hard enough to not get fired. And I've seen so many of those employees. And so it's a matter of, for me, it's a matter of going, well, just bypass that entire system. Like, don't care about that. Do the outrageous thing. Go make your dream happen somehow. If you feel like you have to work for somebody else, find people who are writing really crazy job descriptions on Craigslist. Like the ones that sound weird. Like, go pursue weirdos. Go pursue people who are doing something a different way. If you feel like you need to work for somebody else. And if you feel like you have, whatever is the thing, the chutzpah, whatever is the thing that gets you to, pushes you to want to be a solopreneur or own your own business, then do whatever you can to make that happen. And I think for me, because my circumstances were never, granted, when I first entered this space, I was free of a lot of obligations and responsibilities. I had a dog and a couple suitcases when I left Alaska. But in the course of building the business, the complications started getting, they started piling on pretty quick. Like, I met you and I fell in love. You had 2 children from a previous marriage. You were going through a pretty rough custody battle. And then I ended up getting pregnant. You and I, we got married, we had a baby. Like, there was a lot going on.
Yeah.
And we still focused on making this business happen. So when people feel like they don't have the right circumstances for, creating a business or making their dreams happen, I usually think about, we had a lot of support, granted. We had a lot of people, we had great initial conditions. We had a lot of people willing to support us, as, not for free, like we gave value back, but also people were very supportive of us. We found good people to help support us in a lot of different ways, watching Piper for the weekend while we put on an event or something to that effect. But I think one of the biggest impediments to actually having a career that you want or to be able to follow your passion is removing all of those limiting beliefs.
Yeah.
All of that programming that's been put in front of you as how things are supposed to be or how things have to happen. You're going at 4 years old, going to your grandfather's retirement party and being given the script of how things are supposed to be playing out. I think while that was delightful for their time period, and it was awesome that people got to live their lives that way if that's how they wanted to live. I'm sure there were some people who felt kind of oppressed by that, but if that was the direction they wanted to go and they felt perfectly fine doing that, then I'm happy that they were able to do that. But we're no longer in a time period that should be looking to that as a model. So I think one of the most important things you can do when you're reevaluating your passions and your careers and what it is you want to be doing is to remove all of those templates, to remove the limiting beliefs that come around looking at those templates and going, that's how it's supposed to look.
So I too grew up in a very religious paradigm. And I wasn't given the message, the religion I grew up in didn't give me the message it was wrong to have a career. In fact, you could say that we were encouraged to have really interesting careers potentially and somehow weave God and ministry into those careers. Now, even though my grandfather went through that whole typical career, my father and my mother decided to actually start their own independent nonprofit. And it was actually a ministry. It was a youth ministry. It was tied to a camp where every summer we had kids come to a camp. My parents had kids come to a camp and they would do ministry there with kids. And throughout the year, they had ministry teams and mission trips they would take. And they would work with local churches and churches in the region of where we lived at the time to minister. And they would, basically they were full-time ministry people. And I grew up in this environment where working in youth ministry, that gives you a lot of creative outlets because you've got to keep things fun for teenagers. So from the time I was a little kid all the way through my own teen years, I was around teenagers like my whole life. And things are very energetic and fun, and there's a lot of creativity that can come from that. So I was encouraged to follow creative pursuits from a very young age. And I got a lot of outlet in that ministry environment growing up to, like, for example, my father was on the radio in Pittsburgh on a 50,000 watt Christian radio station. And every Saturday night, there was a 2-hour radio program he would produce. Actually, I would produce it. At the age of 12, 13 or so, I started producing these radio programs. I'd be running the soundboards. I'd be helping write scripts. I'd be booking different guests to come on. I'd be orchestrating the conversation and the commercial breaks and all of these things at a very young age. And it was a great way for me to express myself. And then I had a lot of opportunity to do public speaking, very similar to you, Antonia. And throughout that, at summer camp, being a camp counselor in my teen years and into my 20s, it was a really fun environment. I got to be very creative. And I think I wanted to go into the creative communication field. I wanted to either be a filmmaker or write TV or radio scripts or be somewhere in the communication career. And I was encouraged for this. I was going to do it for God, but I was encouraged to be creative in this. So I went to college, a Christian college, and I studied communications. I got my bachelor's degree in communications, and I was going to go, into the creative fields, into production and things of this nature. And through my college experience, I really thought, well, if I believe what I believe, if this is really important, if sharing the message of God with other people is the most important thing in life, well, why would I ever do anything but that? And so I decided in my college career to go ahead and get my master's degree in leadership with the intention of potentially either taking over or running my parents' ministry or maybe starting my own ministry or working in a leadership position, maybe as the director of a ministry where I could help share God with other people and minister to other people. And so I started down the path of studying and building a leadership presence for that and really getting away from the career angle of doing production, being in film or TV or radio, and going more toward the ministry end of things. And I ended up working in my parents' ministry for about 3 years. I got married right out of college and I started working there, pretty much running. I was by default the back-end operations director, doing finances and helping with payroll and creating programs and booking groups to come up to the camp and working with youth pastors and different ministry people and trying to expand the reach of the ministry. So it was a lot of great training during that time period, but my wife and I at the time had a lot of challenges. We had a lot of internal marital struggles that someday I'll probably share a little bit about in another podcast around that topic. And basically I don't want to say, I guess it was an ultimatum. It was like, hey, I don't want to do this anymore. I'd like to move back to where I'm from, the city I'm from, and I think you need to get a job there. And so I literally ripped myself away from that experience, that road I was on after about 3 years. And I got a job at the Maryland Zoo in Baltimore, of all places, as the associate director of marketing and public relations. And that was a really interesting experience for me because up to that point, I'd done little odd jobs here and there. I'd had a few hourly jobs in college. I worked at a radio station, some other things. But mostly I had been autonomous. I was homeschooled most of my life, and I got to set my own schedule. I got to be creative in how I approached my studies, a lot of self-learning during that experience. In college, I kind of did it in a weird way. I didn't do the traditional. I went to college, but I did it like in half at a community college, half at an actual college, and I just really did things in a creative way. And then I worked with my parents in their ministry for a long time. And so I never had a day job where I had to go in and report to a quote unquote boss and clock in and clock out. And it was salaried, but at the zoo, I worked there 5 years, and it was very much like I had a little cubicle that I had to go sit at every day, and I had certain things I had to do. It was a creative job to some degree, but every time I brought up really creative ideas, the powers that be that were there would be like, well, I don't know if we have that in the budget, or I don't know, that's a little too much. Let's do things that are more templatized, things that are more traditional in how we go about marketing, communications, and public relations here. So I kind of felt like it was soul crushing. At the same time, my wife and I were having more and more challenges, and we had separated, got back together, separated throughout this whole period of working there. And eventually I'm here living on my own. I had moved out. My wife and I had 2 kids at the time, 3 and 1 at the time. I'm living on my own. And throughout all of this experience, I'd never let go of the side of wanting to be creative, be into production. And I'd studied business throughout my teens and my 20s. And I would read business books and think about real estate or investment or starting my own business or starting my own company. And I can remember being so depressed because I had 2 children I was trying to basically support. My wife and I were separated. I felt so stuck. I felt like I had no options. I was on a salary that didn't really give me any ability to travel. It didn't really enable me to do much. And so I would work and all that money would go to basically supporting what was there. And I felt so trapped. And I thought, what can I do here? And so I would leverage my experience in my job. I would try to go to pod camps and meet up with people that are doing podcasting because it was something I was interested in. I would volunteer if any conference had open speaker, like a call for open speakers, like a marketing conference or a podcast conference or anything around the new media that I was starting to dabble in, because I was trying to create some new media for the zoo, some web videos and things. This was around the mid-2000s when this was all starting to come online. Facebook had just started up a few years before, and YouTube and all these things were coming online, and podcasting. So I was really interested in harnessing new media for the future. So I would like fly myself to Vegas to speak in an event I was invited to speak at, not paid. And I remember having no money. I would like sleep in the lobby and then I would go and speak at this event and try to get business cards and make connections with people to see if I could leverage these experiences into some type of a career. I didn't really have a direction. I didn't know where I wanted to go, but I knew I didn't want to be doing what I was doing. I wanted to be in a creative field. I wanted to be expressing myself in new media somehow. And so I started a web consulting company around social media where on the evenings and weekends, I would write content and create products and services and try to get gigs here and there. And I would literally take off work a couple days a week every once in a while to go do like a video shoot for some company in Baltimore City. And I would get enough money to buy a lighting kit for the next one I would do. And so I would scrape things together. I got a couple friends to help me with this, people I knew in the area. And just trying to create energy, trying to create something to get out of the situation that I felt so stuck in. I felt so trapped in this environment. And I remember thinking every day when I would pull up to go into the place where I worked down in this like dark basement underneath this like mansion that was at the zoo property at this little cubicle desk. And I would think to myself, man, I hate this. I said, no, Joel, let's rewire this. And I would then start to think in terms of I'm going into this. This is my CEO training. Someday I'm going to own my own business. I'm going to be able to produce media and create things. And this is my training. This is me going and being disciplined to sit at this desk and do what I don't like to do. And I'm going to take every advantage here I can. And so I would listen to personal growth CDs or MP3s on my MP3 player at the time. I would read articles on my lunch breaks. I would try to make connections. I would, in the evenings and weekends, I'd work on this other business and try to get things going. And I really wanted to have a creative outlet. So I guess if you're listening and you are in a position where you feel stuck, you feel like you're at a desk every day or you're going to this job that you just don't like. You don't know what to do. And there's people that are dependent on you. Maybe you've got a wife and kids or a husband and kids, or maybe you've got a boyfriend or girlfriend that's kind of not working right now and they're dependent on you, or whatever the situation is. But you have dependents or you've got things you're obligated to, school loans, whatever. And you feel so stuck on this treadmill to keep the value going for what you're giving to your job in order to pay the bills. I get what that feels like. I know it feels awful. It feels so intense and it feels like there's no end in sight. I think what got me through is this unshakable belief that someday, I didn't know how, but I just had this vision for myself that I was going to do something that I really loved doing, that I was passionate about, something that juiced me up every morning to get out of bed and do. And at the end of that 5-year experience, and this is about 6 years ago at this point, I was starting to, I was getting more and more into personal growth, and I ended up going to a conference in, I believe it was Los Angeles. That's where I met you, Antonia. And I had been studying internet marketing because I started my own internet marketing company around social media. So I've been familiar with it. I was always interested in personal growth. And this idea of having a business really appealed to me online. And so I went to this event that, some internet people that had been running internet businesses had put on. It was neurolinguistic programming, NLP, to learn how to basically use your brain technology, your own brain technology, to rewire your brain and create better outcomes in your life. And so it was a 5-day event. And here I meet this beautiful, wonderful woman, Antonia. We hit it off like day one pretty much. And we basically haven't been apart since that day. This was like 6 years ago. And I found out what she was into and what she was working on and what you were working on, Antonia. I don't know why I'm talking about third person. And I remember thinking, man, this is really exciting. There's all these people here at this event, and most of them had their own internet companies. Most of them had been doing internet businesses in some fashion. And you and your business partner at the time had like one product that you had done, and you were working on some things. But like I had a lot of business acumen, and so we had talked early on that year, and I said, well, how about I help you guys out? And so I actually, that same house in Las Vegas, I made some radical decisions after the event, and I basically sold all my possessions. I got rid of my apartment, severed my lease. This was all within a few weeks of meeting you and being at this event and just seeing the energy of all these people. And I said, I'm going to make this work. I'm going to make the jump. It was terrifying. I mean, I had 2 kids. It was kind of a difficult extraction period from moving and clear across the country. I moved for about 8 to 10 months from the East Coast to the West Coast to Las Vegas. I lived in this, it was basically a commune kind of internet marketing house. People were all excited about internet marketing and internet businesses and things. And I moved in there, and I would fly back on a regular basis to Baltimore to see my boys. So, I wanted to show up for them as a good dad, but I had to make a change in my career. And it was a tough time. I mean, the flights back and forth and the logistics and working on that whole and I remember I wasn't living with them at the time. I had separated from my wife, and I was living in my own apartment. So the flying back was just a little longer than driving across the town to see them. It was flying back to see them. So it was a little bit of a challenge, but it was working out for me. And I spent the time really connecting to what it was that I wanted to show up and do. And fast forward six years later, through some false starts and some informalities and then more formalities, we're here now running Personality Hacker. And I am excited about this because it's something that's passionate for me. I love the idea of personal growth. I love the idea of helping people understand who they are and how to use the knowledge of who they are to further themselves and make a better world for all of us. So it's been a long road in this idea of career, quote unquote. I would say I've never really had a career up till now. I would say this is probably really my first quote unquote career, but I don't even see it that way. I see this as like a movement. It's a business, yeah, but it's a movement. It's a community of people. It's an expressive element. It's a way to express myself and find a way to get paid for that. Find a way to monetize that, make that a value creation, give value to other people and have value given back, and create that experience together. And I feel as Personality Hacker grows and we bring more people on and the community expands, it's going to be more and more exciting to see other people be a part of that experience too. And maybe there's opportunities that'll come down the pike. If I have my way, there'll be a lot of opportunity for other people that are really smart and savvy to get involved and to also have, a career around me that feels good for them too. I guess I say all that to say that I understand, like I had a little bit of a non-traditional path, obviously, some of the things I've gone through in my life. And I have done some of the traditional things when I had to work that day job where I was so depressed, but I told myself it's going to be okay at some point. And I never stopped. I never stopped hustling. I never stopped trying. And I look back, and over my life, I think I've counted up about 17 businesses I've gone through. I've started, and some of them have been successful. Some of them have failed out or fizzled out. And I think Personality Hacker is like number 17. And a lot of people say, wow, you're just a terrible failure. But if you talk to most entrepreneurs, people that start something that's passionate, they've gone through a lot of false starts because you're figuring things out in the moment. You've got to try things to know what works for you. And I know that if you're in a situation with people in your life, like I said earlier, and you feel stuck, hang in there, because I think if you stay on course to say, I want something more, and you can get real clear about what that is, I believe you can create that in your life. I'm not saying it's easy, but I believe it's possible for you.
I think the thing that ties both of our stories together, because you did come from we came from similar enough backgrounds, but the encouragement that you got was to go to college. It's just and then go get a career. It was just try to contextualize that through, with also doing service and ministry.
Make it about God.
Right. And where I was told that a career was a distraction and college was a distraction. So don't do any of that stuff. Just 100% focus on service and ministry. So it was a different messaging. But I think what ties both of our stories together is that, first of all, at some point we went, and for me, it was a little easier because I was fed a line of don't go down the traditional road. But at some point, both of us went, I don't think this is for me. Like, I don't think the traditional road is for me. When I finally got to a point where I knew I could have a career, I mean, I was in my late 20s. That's not too late to go to college, and that's not too late to go get like a professional career of some sort. And that was definitely something I was playing around with. When I was in my late 20s, early 30s and trying to figure out what the next phase of my life was going to be, I definitely thought about like going and getting a doctorate, even maybe in psychology or something, or actually it was my first love was sociological anthropology. So I was really thinking about going to school for that. But then I just went, I don't think that's for me. I don't think going down that road is the thing that I want to be doing. And when you were faced with that same decision, do you want to just go get a career that includes a day job? You at some point said, I don't think that that's what I want. But what ended up happening is we ended up having to trade out for a lot of hustle. Like if you're not going to do the traditional road, the reason why people recommend the traditional road in the template is because that is a well-worn path. Like there's a lot of people who have gone down that path. There's a lot of mentors down that path. There's a lot of different, guide, like people with, what are those like air traffic controllers with the lights?
Yeah.
You know what I'm talking about? There's like a lot of people sort of like guiding you down that strip, right? Like this is the direction, just keep going. And so that's why most people say, go down the tried and true. But for both of us, we're like, I don't think so. And so when we traded it out for trailblazing. And that means a lot of hustle. It means a lot of figuring things out and throwing spaghetti against the wall and being willing to, basically eat soup out of a can for a while because you can't really afford much more. And, if you've got the circumstances, sleeping on people's couches.
Yeah.
I mean, we did all that. We did all of that. We just kept going.
Yeah.
Because we knew that the alternative was not acceptable to us. And that's not to say that you can't have a more traditional or professional career. If you feel well suited to that, if that feels right to you, then do that thing.
Yeah.
We're not trying to indicate that a more traditional, well-worn path road is by any stretch of the imagination wrong.
Well, it might be right for you because it gives you the freedom to do the creative things on the weekends, evenings, and then you just know the money piece is handled. You don't have to make money from what you do.
Yeah, exactly.
Like creatively.
Yeah, and not only that, but you don't have to think about it 24/7.
Yeah.
I mean, a lot of people love the clock in, clock out. They love, like, as soon as they clock out, they're done. They don't have to think about it another second. And that suits people very well. I mean, admittedly, in what we do, we talk about this stuff all the time. 24/7, we're talking about not necessarily our business, but the content that ends up going in the business. Because we feel like our lives are we feel like our lives are the place that we figure out what works and doesn't work in personal development, because we want to be living what we want to practice what we preach. We want to be able to show up at a microphone, with some, not just theory, but with actually some practice under our belt.
Yeah.
So, but the thing is, that means that we got to hustle. Like there was so many fits and starts. There were so many different things that we said yes to that we shouldn't have. There were things that we should have said yes to that we didn't. There was a lot of unknowns. We did a podcast a long time ago, I think in the first year of our podcasting, where we talked about scary transitions and that moment of like when you're swinging from vine to vine in the jungle, when you let go of the one vine and you're just like in midair and hoping that you'll be able to grab the other vine. I mean, that we talk about that stuff from personal experience.
Yeah.
Like that we've done that. We've let go of the vine and just gone, okay, well, I hope everything like works out and I don't plummet to the ground and die. Like, I hope it's going to be okay. And so that's what we ended up getting trading out for. But I think the reason why we wanted to talk about our experiences is because we want to be examples of it working. Like, you can do that. If you've got the fuel inside of you, if you've got that fire in your belly that tells you to keep going and keeping faith that you're going to be okay, even through the hard times, there are ways to go about a career doing something that you're passionate about, doing something that feels like a purpose or a mission for you, as long as you're willing to have that hustle.
I think for me, I wish I had heard this podcast when I was like 19 or 20, because this idea of getting later in my life and going, oh, wait, I don't want a career in this templatized life. Like, that was, as early as I can remember, I know I never wanted a career templatized life. I wanted to do something creative. And I think the two things that really hijacked me, and well, it all comes back to the one thing, the religious paradigm I was raised in. This is the most important thing on the planet. So why would I do anything else? And I felt really like I was trying to anchor down what I wanted to do for God in my life. And it caused me to go down a road that I don't believe was authentic for me. I made a decision that was to do this ministry stuff. And I liked it. There was a lot of creative outlet there. And I had a lot of history with it. But it was such an easy transition for me to go into that because it was so used to it. But looking back now, I think I would have given myself permission to pursue other things at the time. But I felt like I had to do this. I felt like because of my paradigm, because of the way I was raised, because of how I thought about things, I had to anchor everything I did to God and my paradigm. And then when I got married and my wife was very unhappy in what we were doing in the ministry that I had gone into and wanted to go move closer to her family and get out of the situation we were in, and in my mind at the time, it was to save the marriage, to try to make her happy in a sense, which obviously now I look back, that was a terrible mistake. But I followed her. She basically wanted to get down there. So we went down to her hometown and I got a regular job to make her happy. It wasn't what I wanted. It was to make somebody else happy in my life. I'm sure you're listening and that might be your case. You have something you wanted to do all your life, but because of a paradigm you were raised in or a mimetic code you were given, you suppressed that or said, well, it's not that important for me. I don't need to go down that road because this is a higher ethic. This is higher importance. I want to make my spouse or lover happy. I want to make my parents happy, or my internal mimetic wiring. I want to make sure I don't go against what I've already told myself is the way to go. And I think that's the thing that I wish I had been told at 20 years old is don't do stuff for other paradigms, other mimetic codes. Don't do things for other people. And it's not that you're selfish, but it is something that you get this one ride in this life, and this career idea, what you're going to do for a living, how you show up and make the money you make is a big part of your life. You spend a third of it doing this. And the other third is recreation. The other third is sleeping. So what are you going to do during those times when you're creating value for yourself and your family or your environment or whatever you're at? It's don't let what you think you have to do get in the way of that. I guess that's the biggest message I would give somebody right now listening is I wish I could go back to that's the thing I would tell my 20-year-old self is don't do this because you think you have to. If you want to, that's fine. But don't think that this is the only way you can go down this road. And at the time, I don't know if my 20-year-old self would have heard this. I don't know if I would have been like, oh yeah, right, Joel, thanks for the advice, from the future. I don't know if I would have, because I was making the best decisions I could have made at the time with the information I had and the way my mind was wired at the time. But what's exciting about our modern world is we have podcasts like this. We've got the internet. We've got people connecting more and more. We've got new mimetic codes springing up and technology to help spread information and give the ability for things like if you want to be a filmmaker, you can make things and put them on YouTube and instantly monetize them through ads and build a following and distribute your content that way. That didn't exist when I was a kid. I mean, that's incredible, the technology we have just in the last 10 to 15 years. So there's an exciting world coming with more and more possibilities. And if you're younger, you already see these on the horizon. You already know that you've got these possibilities. And if you're older, and you've got yourself kind of down a trajectory and you're like, man, this is not what I wanted to be doing. Well, you don't have to. There's no quote unquote rules of life that have come down from on high that say you have to be at that accounting job, or you've got to be in that vice president position, or you've got to go to that tire place and change tires every day for that mechanic or whatever. Like that's not what you have to do. And it may feel like that in the moment, but I would give you encouragement that don't do things because you feel you have to. Do them because you want to.
Yeah. Well, and that fire in the belly, that desire to do something else, you got to know that there's a lot of fire there because, again, like I said, the other path requires a lot of hustle. And so you have to know that that's the thing that you want. But if there's an instinct inside of you heading that direction, your inner wisdom is trying to point the needle in the right direction. Your inner wisdom is telling you what you really want. If the message that your inner wisdom is giving you is different than what you think you're supposed to be believing, you will do everything you can to quell that voice. That's what both of us did. Both of us quelled the voices inside of us that said, hey, I think we should be going and doing this other thing. And we said, no, that's not the right thing to think. So I'm not going to think that. And I don't want to pick on any sort of like religious paradigm. I think there's a lot of paradigms that come up for us in this particular avenue of our life.
These are just ours.
Yeah, these were just ours, but we're talking about Maslow's hierarchy of needs. We're talking about safety and security, or even survival. There's a lot of narratives around how that's supposed to look because the stakes are so high. And anytime the stakes are really high, we create a lot of narratives and stories around it in order to ensure everybody's on track.
Yeah.
Because if somebody's not on track, then it threatens to destabilize everything, or at least that's our major fear, is that everything's going to be destabilized because one person is going off the rails. And so there's a lot of narratives, a lot of paradigms around how we're supposed to be going about supporting our families. And if you can feel inside of you a voice that goes, I don't know, man, I think I want to be doing something else, I recommend you start listening to it. You might not obey it yet. You might not feel comfortable enough or confident enough or secure enough to start obeying the voice, but just allow yourself to turn the volume up on that voice just a little bit, just to hear what it's actually telling you. And you might have some stuff kick up for you that says that what it's going to tell you is dangerous. And I recommend going ahead and listening to it anyway. Just let yourself just turn that dial up just a little bit and hear what it has to say, because it might be the voice that you regret not listening to on your deathbed. Like, that might be your one regret, is that you didn't listen to your inner wisdom and you feel like you wasted a huge chunk of your life. So just dial the volume up and listen to what it has to say, and then ask yourself if that's something that you might want to put some faith in.
A real specific question. If you ever meet me on an airplane or we're talking for a couple of minutes, often when I meet people, I ask them this question. I say, if you could duplicate your exact income right now, so you get the exact paycheck every week that you have right now, but you didn't have to do your current job to get that paycheck. You could do anything else on the planet to get that exact same paycheck for 1 year. What would you spend that year doing? And it's a really clarifying question because it gives you this idea of, okay, my income is stabilized as is, and I get freedom to literally do anything I want. And it's not something you even have to create value around. Our friend Dan right now basically saved up a ton of money, quit his job. We need to get him on the podcast, talk about this, and decided to go hike the Appalachian Trail for a year. And so that's what he's doing right now, and he's basically living off his savings. But maybe that's something you'd do. You'd say, I'd go hike the Appalachian Trail for an entire year if I could duplicate my current income. You're not a millionaire, but you have the exact same paycheck every week. And assuming you can, your family and stuff would come with you or do whatever. But what is it that you would do during that year? And I think that it helps get a triangulation here, or to help dial that, what you're talking about, dialing up that voice. It helps get some clarity. It's a question that can focus onto that voice to dial it up. So I'd ask yourself that question. What would you do for a year if you could duplicate your current income? I think that's really helpful. And maybe you want to leave a comment right below the show and let us know what that is for you. I'd be really interested to hear some of the responses of what you would say for that.
Yeah, well, and if your answer isn't, I'd be doing exactly what I'm doing now,
yeah,
then you probably have an inner voice that's whispering in your ear, trying to get some attention.
Yeah.
Yeah, if you say, I would be doing exactly what I'm doing now, then you're golden. You're good to go.
That would be my answer.
Yeah.
I mean, I stopped working for, we work to make money, but that's not why we do this. This is not a business for business sake. There's a lot of easier ways to make money than what we're doing.
Oh, yeah.
and lots of money. But this is something that is passionate for us, and I love doing it. There's days we don't always enjoy the day in and day out grind. I don't like doing taxes or finances and stuff, or running the operations side of the business sometimes, but it is a fun business ultimately. We get to meet really cool people and be very creative and put amazing things out in the world. And hopefully it's helping. I believe it is. We get emails all the time. People say, this is helping me, changing my life. So we keep doing it because we're getting feedback that it's really making an impact.
Yeah, that impact is important.
Yeah, and that's what juices us up every day.
Yeah, absolutely. You know what I would really like? I think I feel pretty complete. Do you feel complete? What I would really like to hear is people's stories.
Yeah.
Like we just told our career stories, and our hope and our anticipation is that they're going to give at least some frame of reference for how you can live a non-templatized life when it comes to careers. And I would just really love to hear people's stories. Like, where are you at right now? Are you doing the thing you're passionate about and that you want to be doing? And if so, how did you get there? Because other people's stories that are similar to ours are going to be just as inspirational for somebody who would love to be listening to their inner wisdom and doing, working on their passion, but just isn't quite sure how to go about it. And please mention the things that have been difficult for you. Like, for me, the number one difficulty is that I don't have a college career. I mean, I don't have a college degree. That's always hamstrung me, or at least it felt like it was going to. And I just decided that I wasn't going to care about that. I'm like, yeah, I don't think I'm going to care about that. I'm just going to become completely self-educated. And I still kick around the idea. I'm like, maybe I should go back and get my degree. I don't know. But right now, I went, well, I'll just go around that. I'll go up, over, around, through. I'm just not going to care about that right now. For you, it was the logistics of having kids from a previous marriage and trying to get through that. And then combined, when we had a child together, it was trying to figure out the financial component when our business was not even close to thriving. Yeah. We were barely making ends meet, and here comes a kid. So like the things that were difficult about getting to the place where you're living your passion, that's what I want to hear. I want to hear what were some of the major pieces you had to overcome in order to live that non-templatized life.
I just remember sleeping on the floor, on a mattress on the floor when we were first starting out. Personality Hacker, Piper was a little baby, and we didn't have money for furniture or anything. I mean, it's like, but we were so passionate about what we were doing, we kept going anyway, no matter the situation, right?
Yeah, we didn't even have a dresser. Yeah. For 7 months. We just had our clothes literally on the floor
in stacks. They were kind of organized stacks, but it was a rough time. It was a very but it was exciting too. We were really in love, and it was fun, and we were building something we loved.
Yeah.
So I wouldn't trade it for the world.
No.
I love having that story and having that memory.
Yep.
We want to hear from you. Head over to personalityhacker.com. Let us know, are you living your passion? What was the story to get there? Or if you're not living your passion right now, answer that second question. If you have your income replicated for 1 year, you could replace your current income without having to do your current job or career. What would you do during that year? What would be the thing that you would go and do every day during the workday to live your life for that year? So those two things, come back and let us know on personalhacker.com right below this show. You can also join our community of like minds, people just like you who are interested in personal growth and growing, over at facebook.com/personalityhacker or twitter.com/personalityhack, HACK.
If you enjoyed this podcast, you can subscribe to us on iTunes and various Android platforms. And if you're feeling particularly generous, you can leave a rating and review on iTunes. It helps us out a lot.
My name is Joel Mark Witt.
And I'm Antonia Dodge.
We'll talk with you on the next Personality Hacker podcast.